Hey, welcome to Friday Sips Live. As you can tell, I'm without Dan again. He did not feel well most of this week, and he had a school thing with his daughter this afternoon, which is super, super important. So he's off doing that. I'm, as usual, last minute getting started. But today, since Dan's not much of a cocktail person, I want to do two things. One, I want to talk about old fashions, because I like old fashioned cocktails. And two, I want to revisit Heaven Hill bourbon, because I had a theory about why I don't care for older Heaven Hill bourbon. And I have a bottle that hopefully would help sort that out, and I think it has. So let me get one thing. I'm going to put this back here for a second. Get one thing that I forgot. Two things that I forgot. Three things that I forgot. Forgot all sorts of stuff. I forgot most of the stuff to make the old fashioned with. So I like old fashions, and I think that the word cocktail gets thrown around incorrectly a lot these days. So I like the old definition, old definition of a cocktail, which is any kind of spirit, water, bitters, and sugar. So technically, I don't think things like cosmopolitans or vodka and cranberry juice or a lot of things get called cocktails. I think they're more mixed drinks. Doesn't really matter. Frankly, I don't know that I really care. But I do think I heard the story from an older bartender in New Orleans that feels like the name old-fashioned for a cocktail came from the fact that in the beginning, cocktails really were just some kind of spirit, water, bitter, sugar. And then as they evolved, people liked that old way of doing it. And he thinks it probably happened when somebody said, make me a cocktail in the old-fashioned way. That's where old fashions came from. But again, I don't want to get too hung up on it, but I do think it's important that, we know that if you have, milk and like a White Russian, it's called a cocktail. Is it? I mean, it's got cream in it. So that's what I think. Hey, Larry. Larry was at a friend's house drinking old fashions. Well, there you go. So we're going to make an old fashioned now. And I'll tell you what, let's talk about the Heaven Hill whiskey first, because I think that'll be quicker. And so the theory was, I have never really enjoyed Elijah Craig barrel proof releases, the barrel proof 12-year-old versions. I really like a lot of the small batch Elijah Craig. Love Heaven Hill other bourbons that are younger, Henry McKenna, Bottled & Bond, the Heaven Hill 7-year. This bottle gave me a chance to test it because this is a single barrel version of the Elijah Craig barrel proof, but it's only 10 years old. And that way, the thinking was, if it is the age, if it is that Heaven Hill bourbons get old and tannic and dry on the finish and that bitter oak, and that's what I don't like, maybe this 10-year would help bridge the gap. I think it has. I haven't had a sip in a bit, so we're going to take a sip now. And we'll see. I don't know if this will solve it 100%, but I do think, ooh, that's delightful. And the confection, sugary, the opposite of what I'm not liking about those older ones. So, that is enjoyable. So this one is, I'm trying to show you, 10 years old, like all of them, non-chill filtered, bottled at barrel strength. This one's 126.2 proof. It is far more enjoyable than any of the regular Elijah Craig barrel proofs I've had recently, and I quit buying them in 2019. I just kind of, it dawned on me back then. It's like, I really don't enjoy these. And I bought one B521 recently because people were raving about it. It was okay, but it was the same kind of thing. It's not that it's the nose that bothers me. It's not really across the front of the palate that bothers me. It's when it gets to the finish, just too bitter for me. This is not. This is quite sweet. The finish is lovely. I think that's it. I think it's the age. I think that there's just some bourbons that sit in the oak and get over oak. Now, I do know that a lot of people like that dry oak finish. I just don't. I don't care for it at all. This has definitely fixed it. The other question I had in my mind, and I always proof things, play with proof on things, and I've played with proof with a lot of those barrel, let's see, if that's 126, I'm gonna guess about, that'll get it to 100. Is that scientific enough for everybody? But I think it's less proof, it's more age. I do think, and look, I'm a hack, and there's no reason I'm any better than anybody else at this, and I'm not gonna tell Heaven Hill what to do, but I had that bottle of Elijah Craig 18, which when we first opened it was good, but then over time it's the same thing, just bitter on the end. Not as bad because it's proofed down to 90. I think that's why they proofed it down to 90. I mean, imagine if a 12-year-old is too dry on the end, an 18 or 20-year-old would be too. Yeah, I went too far with the water, but that is not bubblegum sweet, but that is very sweet, proof down like that. And delicious. Not too sweet. Yeah, so that oak is not as dry. It's there, but it's sweeter. You taste the fruit, and you taste the orange peel on it. There's a bit of apples, I think, too. That's very good. I like that. I don't know if I like it for the 85 bucks I paid for it. If those were like they used to be at 55 or 60, sure, all day long. So I'm gonna call that closed. I think for now, and until new data arises, which changes it, I think my position is I like Heaven Hill bourbon up until around 10 years. I do not care for it after that. Some of that stuff can get super hot. A friend of mine just bought a pick near Colorado Springs, 142 proof. Some of those drink awfully hot. This one doesn't at 126. This doesn't drink hot at all. Well, there you go. I'm closing the book. I don't like old Heaven Hill bourbon. I like Heaven Hill bourbon up to about 10 years. If I see any more of these private barrel picks in the 9 or 10-year-old range, I'm going to probably buy them. There you go. I hope that helps. Cheers, Bender. Good to see you. I think I went down into the 90s there, but I bet if I proofed that right at 100, 110, delicious. Now, let's get on to the old fashioned. Glassware matters to me. This is a lovely Waterford crystal glass that my wife bought me. And she also bought me some smaller ones that are a little different design that I use for Sazeracs, which we're going to talk in just a minute about. But I like this great big glass. I think it's about 12 ounces. Big, heavy base. Old-fashioned glasses, anything where you're going to muddle, you want to have a nice flat base, and this has got, I don't know how best to show that. Let's see if that does it. Yeah, nice flat base, because I'm going to be muddling down there. I don't want it to be curved. It'll be hard for the muddling to happen if that's a curved base. I make my old fashions with, and there's there's all the stuff that to make the old fashioned with. I like to start with these Demerara sugar cubes. You can certainly use a simple syrup, and I have plenty of times. The idea is, remember, the components of this are spirits, water, bitter, sugar. So you need something sweet. In this case, I like the Demerara sugar. Sometimes I'll put a napkin on top, set the cube on it, and then get the bitters on it. Bitters is, yeah. Oh, good. Yeah, let me know when you try that A121. I think that's one that's gotten good reviews too. So the bitters, it goes by dashes, not a particularly uniform measurement. So I like about that many dashes of, let's do that in front of here, about that many dashes of the Angostura bitters, which is these bitters. This is kind of, when somebody just says bitters in general, they're probably talking about Angostura. I also like a little dash of Reagan's orange bitters in there. And bitters, if you don't know, is a tincture or some sort of mixture that's, it'll be fruit or fruit peels or barks and roots and herbs that gets all cooked down and alcohol gets added to it. So there is alcohol. This is 44% by volume, if I remember correctly, 44.7. But you use so little of it. If you had a bitters and soda to give it a little flavor, I wouldn't really call that an alcoholic type drink. Reagan's is 45%. So that's that piece. Now, at this point, most people will muddle that sugar cube with water, and that's certainly acceptable. I think, for me, I like the proof of the whiskey to be in the mid-90s up to maybe 100. That's what I like proof-wise. At that proof, though, that's the proof I want to use. So I'm going to use Wild Turkey 101 for this particular old fashioned, and as such, I will muddle that with water. But if I use anything under 100 proof, say 90, 95 proof, I will muddle that with a little bit of the bourbon, like this, which I'll do even though I just said I'd do water. So just a little splash like that. So if you got a 90 proof, say you're using Weller Special Reserve, 94 proof, Elijah Craig Small Batch, anything in the Eagle Rare 90 proof, anything in that range, I would muddle it with the bourbon instead of water, because I don't want to proof it down too much. I'm going to put some ice in it, which reminds me, I forgot the ice. Give me just a minute. So I'm going to let that sit while I go find the ice. And if you muddle it with the bourbon instead of the water, then of course you preserve some of that proof. And frankly, it's not the biggest deal because we're using so little of that in there. And if you were to use simple syrup, then of course that would have been watered down already, because simple syrup is just water and sugar. Now I wish I'd gotten these out earlier, because in order for these clear ice spheres not to melt, so there's my clear ice sphere. It'll be clear once it sits for a second. What you want to do is leave those out for about 3 or 4 or 5 minutes before you use them, and temper them, and that way they won't crack when you put them in the alcohol. The temperature difference does that. So just sitting out for a few minutes will temper that ice cube or ice sphere, whichever you're using. And clear does matter. It sounds pretentious, but the reason ice isn't clear is that there's air in it. And if there's air in there and your cube is cloudy, that means it's going to melt faster, because less of it's actually frozen water and more of it's air. So that's why clear really matters. They are very pretty, which I happen to think matters, just like glassware partially matters because it's attractive. It also matters because it just feels good on the lip. So you never get the sugar all the way dissolved at this point, and that's okay. And it smells wonderful. And then we want the rest of our bourbon. I used 2 ounces. I don't know how people do that funkiness with their fingers. I don't really do that. And then in order to be correct, then you have to do a little bit for the cook, which I wouldn't do in front of you if you were here at my house watching me make your old fashioned. I give that a little stir. And then what we'll do is, and this really would have sat a little longer, so it may crack, and you'll hear it crack. But I just put it on my spoon and slip it down in there. And then, normally you'd stir something like this, but because it's a sphere, it doesn't really help get it cold, so I'll just splash the bourbon up on the side just to get it to chill. And I will spin it a little bit, because I guess it does help a little bit, but I think this little wiggle action makes it more effective. And then I don't, by the way, I should have mentioned, if somebody makes me an old fashioned in a bar and they start out by putting oranges and cherries and fruit in the bottom and then muddling that, I just tell them to stop, because I didn't ask for fruit cocktail. I asked for an old fashioned cocktail, and I don't like big chunks of muddled fruit. But if you choose to muddle your fruit and it's an orange or a lemon, don't muddle the skin and the pith, only muddle the fruit part. Otherwise it's bitter and nasty. But I do like a little spritz or twist of orange, and so I do that above the glass. I want some of it on the glass, actually. It's not necessarily all needs to go in there because most of this is going to be an olfactory piece. And then once I get that on there, I'll rub it around the outside, kind of roll it around this way for prettiness, and drop it in. And that is how I like my old fashioned. And as you notice there, it really is clear. How far can I get that over? Really is nice and clear in there. Some of the sugar on the bottom that you're seeing there too. So that is how I like my old fashioned. And yeah, Angus Clear Ice definitely matters. It enhances the experience. Yeah, Larry, open that stuff. C920. I didn't have it. I don't think I bought any in 2020 of those. I think I quit in 2019. B519 was the last one I bought. And then I didn't buy another one until B521. Okay. Old fashions, cocktails. Now, next on the cocktail front is, in the case of an old fashioned, the actual earliest descriptions of the cocktail are and the earliest descriptions of cocktails in general, any spirit, bitters, water, sugar. So in that case, a cocktail could certainly be made with any spirit, rum, vodka, gin, etc. I think typically old fashions, to be called an old fashioned, it means it's whiskey. So it's rye typically or bourbon typically. Those are the two primary spirits for that. But I don't think if somebody says I want an old fashioned made with rum, I don't know if that has a specific name. I wouldn't fight about that. What I will fight about though is when a recipe calls for a particular ingredient and people change that. So for instance, if somebody wants to make an old fashioned with rye whiskey, go right ahead. I do that sometimes too. If you want to use Angostura bitters, great. If you want to use Reagan's Orange or some walnut bitters or some funky, I think the hipsters are responsible for it, but there is a proliferation of different sorts of bitters. Doesn't matter. Any of those bitters in a drink like this could certainly still be called a cocktail and an old fashioned, because nowhere does it say use only these bitters. That changes with a cocktail like the Sazerac. The Sazerac cocktail, invented in New Orleans and actually originally made with cognac, now for the long, long time made with rye whiskey. It specifies Peychaud bitters. These are bitters that were made in New Orleans by Armand, I think it was Armand Peychaud. He was a pharmacy operator, I think. He made those bitters in the process and used them in his business. A Sazerac cocktail specifically calls for those bitters. Now, I see a lot of recipes for Sazeracs that have those bitters and a dash of Angostura. Those bitters and something else are completely different bitters. In my opinion, that's no longer a Sazerac. I don't really care which rye you use. I do think Sazeracs are better with the Kentucky-style rye that are just barely rye. So the Sazerac rye itself, the baby Saz, is that's what they make it with if ever you get it in New Orleans and most places. But the Elijah Craig rye makes a good substitute. The other night I made one with that High West Rendezvous rye we opened last week, Friday. And it's okay. I mean, it's good, but it was different. Don't care which rye you use. It needs to be rye whiskey. It needs to be Peychaud bitters. If you put something else in that, it's not that it's not a cocktail. It's not that it isn't good. It's not a Sazerac. It's some kind of old-fashioned up when you do it that way. That's it. That's my opinion. So don't know how you guys feel about that. From there, we move on to other cocktails that get further away. You know, another standard cocktails of Manhattan. My wife and I make a fair number of Manhattans. We love them. Does that meet the definition of spirits, bitters, water, sugar? Well, it's got vermouth in it. Vermouth is a fortified wine, so it's a wine product, alcohol added to it. I don't know, they're really good. And frankly, I don't want to split hairs that bad. But it does bother me when somebody says, I made you a Sazerac and it's got bourbon in it and Angostura bitters. It still may be good. It's not a Sazerac. That is pretty much what I had to talk about today. And that's not very long. We've been going long lately. So maybe I won't keep you guys. That old fashioned was delicious. You guys, Larry, I know makes old fashions. Anybody else in the old-fashioned game? Or is it just me? Or is Dan? Because Dan does not like them. Although I made him, the couple Fridays ago we were here, Dan and I both. We drank way too much. And when we closed up, I made Sazeracs and old-fashions. And he thought the old-fashions were too sweet, but he did like the Sazeracs. So that was encouraging. Yep, Bender does enjoy old-fashions. Cool. How do you make them? Do you make them, was that close to where you make them? Or do you have a completely different approach to those? So, okay, well, that's all I got today. I know I set all this up for just a few minutes, but that's what I got to talk about today. I don't have anything else to really drink on. This is super fun. Larry likes Manhattans too. I do too. I love a Manhattan. We've been making Red Hooks lately. Red Hooks we make our Manhattans with rye whiskey, and that can go either way. A lot of people like them with bourbon. I use that and the Chochi America vermouth. Delicious vermouth. It's super chocolatey and dark cherry and such. Very good. We make ours with rye. The Red Hook is for sure a rye cocktail. It uses it's the rye whiskey. It's vermouth, but it also sneaks in a little of this. So the Luxardo Maraschino liqueur, which incidentally is a healthy drink because it's, as it says here on the label, delicious on fruit salad, strawberries, raspberries, kiwi, and pineapple. And I've done that, and it is good. So the Red Hooks are delicious. You little less vermouth, quarter ounce of this, quite delicious. Or some people split the vermouth and that. Very good. It uses a different vermouth. It uses a Punta Mas. I think it's a Spanish vermouth. Not sure. Oh yeah, Bender goes barrel proof on his old fashions. I do that sometimes. Yeah, I don't ever use the pre-made simple syrup. It's just too easy to make simple syrups and inexpensive. And so I generally will have some white sugar-based simple syrup in the refrigerator that I use for Sazeracs, and but I tend to make them with that way if I decide I want a little sweeter, easy to make it sweeter. And once I make the simple syrup, it kind of is what it is. I'll tell you this too, when you said that barrel proof, Bender, that made me think of something. Now I've forgotten it. Yeah, I don't remember. Do glasses matter to you guys like they do to me? I have a bad glass buying problem. These are just delicious. They are fabulous glasses. I like the thinness. So this is super thin around here, and that just has the most lovely feel. Melissa and I got a set of rocks glasses when we got married. Will be 32 years in just over about a month and a half. And we still have those, and that's what I make her margaritas, and she likes margaritas, and so we have, maybe we'll talk about tequila one day. So we got a handful of nice tequilas over there on the shelf. So I use generally decent tequila, lime juice, a little bit of agave syrup, and often we'll use Grand Marnier, but we've been using the dry Curacao. Very good. So that's how I make those. But those glasses, those rocks glasses we've always put those in the dishwasher. And I think over time that's made them cloudy. So it's a pain, but now I always hand wash these guys. Well, Larry, maybe we ought to get you some non-basic and generic glassware. I think that's important. It's the visceral feel of it to me. It's the same reason that having this style of peeler is better than the rubber handle style or the old style ones. I like a wooden muddler. It's just, there's something about the visceral piece of that. I like to think it's because I'm an old soul, but I don't know. I just love glassware and the feel of it. These that I drink out of, I like a lot, but these aren't expensive. These are Libby glasses done with the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So I like those. But if I ever get stuck on just what the drink needed, I generally will default back to the Glencairns. Those have I think the best overall nose and just a great feel on the lip. It sounds silly. Bender, around here we don't blame stuff on our wife, but I understand if your wife keeps breaking your glasses, that's no good. Anyway, yeah, glassware matters to me. Okay, well, I feel like I'm droning on. We'll wrap this up. This has been fun. I'm glad to know you guys are into cocktails. Yeah, do you like those Kentucky Bourbon Trail glasses, Larry? I like them. I have a big nose, so it's nice to be able to get down in there a little better sometimes. So it's been fun. I'm glad you guys are into cocktails too. I took the opportunity, since Dan wasn't here, to talk about them. He's not against it, and I think I'll convert him at some point. He did like the Sazerac, or maybe it was the Old Fashioned. I can't remember. He liked one and not the other. One I made too sweet, but in my defense, I was drunk. And if you're drunk and making cocktails where portions matter, that's not going to work out well. So we'll hopefully get him into it. And if not, hopefully he'll be back next week. We've got a couple of samples sent to us, which is a new thing. Dan asked for samples, and I guess people sent them, which was probably something we should have done a long time ago. But we've got the Dragon's Milk whiskey, and made by the people that make the Dragon's Milk beer, New Holland. I love that Dragon's Milk stout beer, barrel-aged stout. Originally I thought, oh, that's cool. They're just going to make whiskey out of the beer, but it's called bourbon on the label, which means it's mostly corn. Pretty sure there's no corn in that beer. So we'll figure out how that goes. Maybe next week, if Dan's back in action, we'll drink that and taste it. We also got some High West whiskey sent to us to review, which will be fun. We'll open that here live with you guys, hopefully next Friday, maybe the Friday after, and drink them together. So thanks again, Larry. Thanks, Bender, for hanging out. And I guess we'll see you next week. Cheers.